Everything you think you know about ancient Rome from the movies is wrong, and it starts with something you'd never expect to find on a street corner. Picture walking through Rome 2,000 years ago and passing a large clay jar sitting right out in the open, placed there specifically so you could relieve yourself into it whenever you needed to. This wasn't vandalism, and nobody was going to stop you or even look twice. It was infrastructure, as normal and unremarkable as a trash can, and just as essential to how the whole city actually ran day to day. The Romans had an entire economy quietly built around something every single person produces for free, and they were not shy about it. Workers called fulones would collect that urine from jars all across the city, let it sit and ferment for weeks until it broke down into ammonia, and use the result to run entire laundries called fulonicae. A worker would stand barefoot in a vat full of clothes soaking in aged urine and stomp on them like someone crushing grapes for wine, letting the ammonia strip grease and brighten fabric that no amount of plain water could ever touch. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii found several of these laundries almost perfectly preserved, complete with their basins and treading stalls still intact, which tells you exactly how central this business was to daily Roman life across the empire, not some rare or shameful practice tucked away out of sight. And it didn't stop at laundry. Wealthy Romans used that same ammonia to whiten their teeth and freshen their breath, mixing aged urine with crushed eggshells or pumice into something close to an actual toothpaste. The poet Catullus wrote mocking verses about a man named Ignatius, whose suspiciously bright, constant smile came from imported urine, specifically shipped in from Celtiberia in Spain, because Spanish urine had a reputation among Romans for being the strongest on the market. Yes, that means people genuinely paid extra for premium imported pee, the ancient equivalent of paying more for artisanal salt or small batch olive oil today. The whole operation got so profitable that Emperor Nero taxed it directly, and his successor Vespasian kept collecting that same tax after him. When Vespasian's own son complained about how disgusting the money smelled, his father famously held a single coin up to his nose and told him, plainly and without apology, that money doesn't stink. 2,000 years later, we still repeat that exact line in boardrooms and business articles, almost always with no idea it traces back to a tax on public urinals, collecting human waste. Here's where things get considerably darker. If ancient Rome had rivals stranger than Rome itself, the king of Pontus takes the crown without much real competition. Mithridates VI spent his entire life terrified of being poisoned, and with good reason, since his own father had been murdered that exact way, and his own mother was strongly suspected of trying to finish the job on him next during his childhood. So, as a young man hiding out alone in the wilderness for years, avoiding the same fate, he came up with a plan that sounds less like ancient history and more like a comic book villain's origin story. Every single day, he swallowed tiny, carefully measured doses of poison entirely on purpose, slowly building tolerance the exact way a weightlifter adds plates to a bar week after week without rushing the process. He tested his formulas on condemned prisoners first, refining a mixture that historians say eventually combined somewhere between 4 and 50 different toxic ingredients, all bound together with honey into something almost pleasant enough to actually swallow. And it worked. It worked so completely that centuries later, doctors still use the word Mithridatism, named directly after him, to describe building immunity through repeated small exposure to a toxin. Roman physicians were reportedly so impressed by his methods that they spent generations afterward trying to recreate his personal formula from fragments and rumors, even though Mithridates himself spent his entire life as one of Rome's most persistent and dangerous enemies. But here's the twist nobody sees coming. When Roman forces under Pompey finally cornered him and defeat became absolutely certain, Mithridates tried to end his own life the exact same way he'd spent decades quietly preparing for, by swallowing poison rather than face capture. It didn't work. His body had gotten too good at surviving exactly this. According to the historian Appian, in his final desperate moments he had to turn to his own loyal bodyguard and ask the man to finish the job with a sword instead. The most famous poison king in ancient history built himself a body that couldn't even die on command when it mattered most, which is either the single greatest achievement of his life or the worst possible outcome of it, depending entirely on how you choose to look at it. Now, close your eyes for a second and picture a Roman statue in your mind. You're almost certainly picturing gleaming white marble, cold, pure, and dignified, exactly the kind you'd see roped off behind glass in a museum. That image is essentially a 500-year-old mistake that somehow never got properly corrected in the popular imagination. When Renaissance scholars started unearthing Roman and Greek statues in large numbers, centuries spent buried underground had already stripped away almost all the original paint, leaving nothing but bare, weathered stone behind. Instead of recognizing that absence as decay and simple erosion, those scholars decided that blank white marble represented the true pinnacle of classical taste, restraint, and civilized beauty. Some archaeologists in later centuries went even further, actively scrubbing away the faint traces of pigment they occasionally did find still clinging to the stone, convinced it had to be later contamination rather than the original artwork staring them directly in the face. It wasn't until researchers eventually started using ultraviolet light and detailed pigment analysis that the full truth became impossible to ignore any longer. Roman statues were painted in bright, almost aggressively vivid colors, deep reds, ocean blues, metallic golds, and intricate patterns worked into clothing, skin tones, and hair. Emperors, gods, and generals all once stood around looking less like solemn, dignified museum pieces and more like a wax museum crossed with a circus tent. The serene, colorless Rome you picture in your head right now never actually existed the way you imagine it. It was invented centuries later by scholars who simply preferred quiet white marble to the messier, louder, more colorful truth sitting right in front of them the entire time. One of the most famous Roman statues in the world, the Augustus of Prima Porta, standing proud in stark white marble in every textbook photo, has actually been reconstructed by researchers in full color, and the real version shows a red and gold cloak, a bronze-toned breastplate, and painted flesh tones that make the emperor look almost startlingly alive rather than carved from stone. So if the art wasn't what you assumed, what about actual daily life for ordinary Romans walking those streets? Movies show you thriving citizens lounging in marble courtyards, healthy and glowing under the Mediterranean sun. Reality hits very differently. Roughly 1 in 3 children in ancient Rome never made it to their first birthday, and most adults were lucky to see 30. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you though. Researchers studying skeletons from central Italy found that people living in that same region were actually healthier before Rome ever conquered them. Once Rome took over, life expectancy dropped, and children started dying young more often than they had before, not less. Becoming part of the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever seen didn't make your life longer or safer. For a lot of ordinary people, conquest by Rome quietly made things worse, roads and aqueducts included. And that brings us to the most famous Roman myth of all, the one you've probably repeated yourself at some point without ever stopping to question it. Nero fiddled while Rome burned, except he couldn't possibly have because the fiddle, meaning the violin, wouldn't be invented for another 1,500 years after his death. This isn't a matter of historical interpretation or generous nuance. It's chronologically, physically impossible, roughly the same as claiming an ancient Roman checked his smartphone while watching the fire spread. If Nero played any instrument at all during the Great Fire of 64 AD, which burned for 6 days and destroyed roughly 70% of the city, ancient sources agree it was the cithara, a large harp-like instrument that happened to be his genuine artistic passion, not some symbol of careless neglect toward his own people. And there's an even bigger hole in the story that rarely makes it into the popular version anyone actually repeats. According to the historian Tacitus, Nero wasn't even in the city when the fire first broke out. He was at his private villa in Antium, roughly 32 miles away, and rushed back to Rome the moment he heard flames were spreading dangerously close to his own home on the Palatine Hill. Once he arrived back in the burning city, he opened his private gardens to house thousands of homeless survivors and organized emergency food supplies to keep the population from starving in the chaos that followed. The image of a cruel, indifferent emperor calmly playing music while his own city burned around him was built centuries later, first by Roman historians writing under later emperors who had every political reason to make Nero look as monstrous as possible by comparison, then cemented permanently in popular memory by Shakespeare and other playwrights who swapped his actual instrument for a fiddle simply because English audiences already knew exactly what a fiddle was. So here's what all 5 of these stories actually have in common, once you strip away the polished movie version of ancient Rome. A jar of urine sitting on a street corner that quietly built an entire profitable industry. a king who poisoned himself into total invincibility and then couldn't die even when he desperately needed to. Statues that were never remotely the color you've always pictured in your head. A civilization that didn't automatically make life better for the people living directly under its rule. And an emperor blamed for centuries for playing an instrument that wouldn't even exist for another millennium and a half. Ancient Rome wasn't the gleaming, marble-white, toga-clad postcard image that movies and history class summaries have been selling you for years. It was messier, stranger, considerably more human, and honestly, once you actually know the real version, a lot more interesting than the myth ever managed to be. The empire that gave the world roads, law, and language also ran on recycled urine, a poisoned king who couldn't die, and a rumor that outlived every fact that contradicted it. And somehow all of that fits together into one civilization.